Good evening. Welcome to the Leader School Masterclass. I cannot tell you how absolutely I am elated that 35,000 of you have taken a very necessary step in terms of the development of your own leadership life and journey. So tonight we're going to have a blast. What we decided to do was open up the first night so that we could get more capacity. But for nights 2 and 3, that's Tuesday and Wednesday, you're definitely going to have to register. And then there's going to be exclusive resources put out in the private Facebook group and then on the platform of the Leader School Masterclass. So thank you so very much. Also, I hope that you have at your disposal your textbooks. I hope you've got your pen. You're going to need to take a lot of notes because you're going to hear some words and some phrases and some concepts that may be very new to you. And I don't want you to miss the meat in what it is that you are doing. So I am so excited. It goes without saying that the timeliness of something like this is absolutely ironic. You know, we're in a time where everything, the consistent phrase that I've been using is that everything rises and falls on the back of leadership. And if you know me, one of the things that I enjoy doing is debunking myths and debunking non-effective approaches to everything, essentially. So I can't tell you how proud I am of all of you for choosing this moment, this time to begin to develop yourself deliberately in the subject of leadership. It is my hope to not only expand your understanding of it, but to also expand and extend your definition of it. We're going to do some of that at the top of our class tonight. And then for distinction, we're going to do it tomorrow. And then on destiny, we're going to talk about trajectories. I want to introduce a very critical figure to you. Many of you have already seen him. This good-looking gentleman, he's a scholar in his own right, was one of my best friends as a boy, and he's a professional communicator and a professor in the same field. And I thought it was appropriate for someone who organically understands me and where we come from to partner with me in this project. So you're going to see a whole lot more of Charles Alexander. He has phenomenal content of his own, and you know, a major part of the subject of leadership is expression. And depending upon how you lead and where you lead, everything concerning vision, concerning idea, concerning audience, it has a major thread, and that's how people communicate. And communication is not something that I think we should take lightly, because communication determines how well people lead, but also how well people follow. I can't tell you how many organizations I've helped and how many leaders that popular facets started to identify as a leader or learn the subject of leadership, you're probably going to land somewhere on the pendulum of one of the more popular facets or versions of leadership. Now, this is a very complex thing, because when you're dealing with leadership, there is not one way to do it, but there are wrong ways to do it. If you're taking notes, please write that down. There is not one way to do it and or approach it, but there are wrong ways to do it. That kind of makes the subject of leadership a very big issue to break down and to reduce and to tackle. So we have several schools of thought on the subject of leadership. And ironically, they've grown at different rates and paces in both urban and rural contexts across several segments. You have Fortune 500 companies right now that are paying people not just based upon who they are on paper. I want you to realize why this is important, and I want this to captivate you. There was a moment in our culture where paper determined your pay, paper determined your position, and determine your ascent. That is no longer the case. Gone are the days where who you are on your resume alone determines how you receive and how you can excel. We're living in an opportune moment where there are people who, irrespective of their education, and I'm saying this as an avid a promoter of education, but there are people who didn't have the opportunities that I had to go and become a doctor of education, or like some of you who have MBAs and other realms, but they're excelling because they understand the power of leadership. Whatever you call it, they understand how to identify moments and to become what's necessary in the moment. So we're going to do a whole lot of development because, for example, there is a difference between organizational leadership, adaptive leadership, visionary leadership. If you are a minister, or if your space is in the Christian world, you probably are more used to and accustomed to inspirational forms of leadership. Then you have circumstantial leadership, which is leadership based upon a situation or a scenario that has no permanence to it. It's need-based strictly. Now, and the way what we're going to approach this in this 3-day module is we're going to do what's called theorizing. So what we're going to do is just basically think out loud to determine our leadership thought and concept. And we're going to make it so broad that everybody can find their space in it. My dominant concern, and what I want you to leave here tonight understanding before we get more and more advanced and complex, is it does not matter what position you are in. I had to tackle this issue very candidly tonight, because very often in business communities, very often in certain segments of how we function as people in life, we think that leadership is synonymous with position. But here's what you need to think about. There are people in powerful positions that have poor leadership. I'm not going to give you any examples, but there are people that are in powerful positions that demonstrate poor leadership. If that really is hitting you right now, I want you to go ahead and put that in the chat. That's a point I want you to always reiterate while we're in leader school. It does not matter if you are in a position. You still need to develop the leadership theory that you're going to build your life on and build your company on. It's very important. And so I want to debunk that, and I want to make sure that this is broad enough to fit the teenager, broad enough for the housewife, broad enough for the single mom, broad enough for the CEO. There are certain intelligence quotients that matter more now than ever before. And I think that leadership, even after the next several months, it is my gut instinct that the subject of leadership is going to become more and more, is coming to fore, whether it's around election year or whether it's around times where we're seeing major changes in our culture. The conversation has to be about leadership. My burden is that our communities in America stop relying on default leadership, on coincidental leadership. For example, if you are a man, you probably have it in you to be a husband, and then naturally and molecularly you have it in you to be a father. But the mistake that very many of us make is that we don't see those as different lives and different training protocols. As a man, you have to learn what that is, and then you learn what a husband is, and then you learn what a father is, if that so happens to be your journey. So what I'm showing you is that whether you're a man or a woman, every role you play has its own life, its own spectrum of education, its own commitment to its knowledge. You just don't arrive in marriage, and you just don't arrive in business. The warning is, if we continue to, in any area that we serve, approach leadership accidentally or by default, or even the more broader concept, which is reactionary leadership, I think that that's something that we have to realize that we do, is that we respond after an event because we've not demonstrated the forethought, and we've not also committed to investing in the development that prepares us for the unknown. The greatest leaders are groomed in the unknown. Think about the power of uncertainty really quickly. Uncertainty has to do with unpredictable events, unforeseen and uncontrollable circumstances. It has to do with a change of pace, a change of calendar, and a change of rhythm. And that is the platform. That is the stage that all leadership thrives in and is seen at its clearest, all right? So we've substantiated that there are thousands of leadership thought and theory that are constantly being developed in universities and in study groups and in conversations around the world. And the more popular conversation right now is around organizational leadership, but it is the Stevenson theory to leadership that before we teach you how to build powerful organizations, we've got to have a new discussion about the power of self-leadership and what that does. So I'm going to start there tonight. So we already have given you that there are broad categories of leadership and also leadership expression. And we have already debunked that we have to continue to remind ourselves that leadership is not the role you play. So if you're like, well, if leadership in its broadest sense, I have to make this big, if leadership in its broadest sense is not the role I play, then what is it? There is a myth that if people are following you, then that makes you a leader. And I strongly, vehemently disagree. I think you can be an influencer and have the potential to lead, but people following you doesn't always develop you. But so the essence and the actual science of leadership is, what is your consistent relationship to responsibility? What is your consistent relationship to responsibility? There are cultural icons that are in powerful leadership opportunities that don't demonstrate the responsibility for that said influence. That goes for organizations, churches, that even goes for programs and projects. You know, we have to have a brand new talk about what responsibility is, deciding it, defining it, but most importantly, please lean in, prioritizing responsibility. Every moment, every opportunity, and every need is going to determine what responsibilities need to be engaged first and what responsibilities actually need to be postponed. So this is a leadership issue, because if you think about it, who is more responsible than the leader, irrespective of the role or the position, even in your own life? If we look at this as an individual person, you may say, well, I'm not in the C-suite yet, or I'm not the head or the president of a company. Yeah, but you're the head and the president of your life and your potential. And so what that means for you is you have to develop a deliberate, I want to use the phrase intentional, relationship to the responsibilities that are yours. Okay, so that's the angle we're going from today. The leadership discussions that are going on right now are largely being shaped based upon the law and the rule of exposure. And what that means is people generally lead in the ways that they've observed. They lead in the ways that they've observed, both behaviorally and also deliberately. So depending upon what your circumstance is and what your life situation has been, who and what you've been exposed to is going to determine, whether you realize it or not, how you're going to show up in your leadership life. Okay. Now I want to put a parenthetic there again. Your leadership life is different from your wife life and your husband life and your mama life. It has everything to do with the core values you're making the decision to lead from, to influence the world around you, and to decide things and outcomes for other people beyond you. All right. Woo, I know it's a whole lot going on right now. You're probably really heavy, and I use a lot of big words, but I'm not coming down. So you're just gonna have to define it, and you're gonna have to go and investigate it, because I want you to grow, and I want to challenge you. I want to push you into the realm of leadership that you've never been in before. All right, now, because of the broadness, let's take it here, of leadership, both in theory and practice. Now, what that means is that we have all seen great leaders, outstanding leaders, and we've also seen leaders that have not done very well, right? So because of the broadness of that, most of you have mental bookends and paradigms that you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about your ideas of good and or bad leadership. Some of it may be cultural, some of it may be circumstantial, but my objective is to make you deliberately think about how you think about the subject of leadership. So it's almost impossible to capture the full meaning of leadership with theory alone. So the scene, the setting, the scenarios that need leadership, that demand leadership, will determine your style and approach. For example, if you are a good leader, one of the things you're going to be is versatile. You're going to have broad versatility. You're going to know what it is to adjust and adapt to the moment that needs you to influence it, okay? So we're not just influencing people. That is vitally important. We're not just influencing as we serve in our organizations. We're also stewarding moments in history. So what that means is that as things change in the culture, as things change economically, even, you have to have adaptive leadership practice, but also resilience in your leadership style. For example, something may occur that you didn't anticipate to occur. You have to develop the resilience, both strategically, emotionally, and sometimes even relationally, to manage the moment well. Here's why. A missed moment in a business, in a marriage, in a church, a missed Moment is very difficult to recapture. And if you miss the moment, the expense is going to be a loss of momentum in your sales, in your visioneering, and your ability to forecast and plan back from where you want to go in the future. So that is very, very, very important to develop that flexibility and fluidity in your leadership style and approach. I cannot tell you how many executives I talk to and coach who stunted the span of their organization's impact because of simple stubbornness. They lead from intuition and they lead from preference and not necessarily what the moment demands. Okay, so that's a very important thing to keep before you. I am calling this first portion of this leadership series the DNA of leadership. The DNA of leadership. Now, it's an unusual phrase, but I'm going to try to give you the pragmatics of it so we can develop some educational practice to lean off of when we go there. The phrase or the word DNA in the concept of leadership is being used with extreme intentionality, And here's why. We'll make it big and then we'll make it small. If leadership is not necessarily position, my theory is leadership is life. Leadership is life. All of life is determined by someone who has leadership. Doctors have leadership. Lawyers have leadership. Those that pay you, those that determine your promotion. These are leadership issues and angles. So you don't have to necessarily be the person that is the leader to understand and benefit from the knowledge of leadership. If you work with one, if you are around one, you have to understand it, and you have to understand it at a depth that you probably have not done so before. So my theory is that leadership is life. I think that when you wake up in the morning and decide what you're wearing, that's a decision-making skill. I think that when you decide if you want to marry or not, again, that's a decision issue. Your influence over your own life and experience is a leadership issue. It's not just about your personality, and it's not just about your goals and your obligation. It's about how well you can lead, not just for yourself. This is going to matter to you in a minute, but lead from yourself. Lead from yourself. If that is the case, let's look at some practicals about DNA. DNA is the rule, the principle, the chemical, the asset that determines everything in human life. It's interesting that there is no species on the planet that does not have a DNA. If we don't see you physically, we can still develop imagery of you by exploring your DNA. And this is important because we all have one. We are all made by them. And so I think leadership really does begin with being willing to start from the story. Please write that down. In leadership, no matter what segment of society you're going into, no matter what level of education you're going into, a grave mistake in the last regime of leaders in America was that they did not start from the story. They did not start from the story. I'll explain why that matters to you. All right. Now, to comprehend this, let's go through some things that DNA determines. Number one, it definitely determines height. It determines weight. It determines complexion. It determines certain proclivities towards even sickness and diseases and ailments. So DNA can tell us a lot. So what I'm unpacking is DNA really is the story. It is the starting point. It's the premise and it's the code for why a thing is going to be what a thing is going to be. Let's look deeper. Not only do human beings have DNA, organizations have them, associations have them, programs have them. They all have a DNA. Here is a more dangerous concept though. DNA is not a decision. It is a discovery. You don't decide what the DNA is. You discover it. Over time, you start to learn it and you start to see it. Now, this is so in your leadership life and preparation because you have what I'm calling a leadership genetic. What that means is that depending upon what the story is, how the story began, and what happened that either progressed the story or made the story move back, you have a genetic in your leadership, something that you do innately, all right? Now realize this, if you were sitting right here